Okay, so in the last video I said we were going to talk about questions 5 and 6. Well, didn't quite get to question 6, but let's have a look at it now. So question 6 says, using all the sources, explain why the strategies employed by the US might have been ineffective against the Viet Cong forces. Now this question is worth 6 marks. It's the one that you should be spending the most time on. And it really should, as I've written up here on the Word document, it should be like a mini essay. So what I'm looking for you to have is an introductory statement, some paragraphs, and then a concluding statement as well. Okay, so what you're asked to talk about is whether or not the strategies employed by the US, why they might have been ineffective. And so in history, one of the best things that you can do is to discuss the proposition, so this idea that the strategies that the US used were ineffective, and then also to consider other reasons why the US have been ineffective. So what I'm going to suggest that you do with this is to write 3 paragraphs. And in the first one, what did the US do that was ineffective? So what you'd have to do is to flick through all of these sources. So you'd scroll through and have a look and try and find evidence that suggests that what the US did was ineffective. One of the other things that I suggest that you do is to look for what it was that the Americans could control. So what I would look at is here, without a front, flanks, or rear, we fought a formless war. A formless war. So the Americans had control over how they went about fighting the war, and yet, it was really quite ineffective. And you could look down here at other evidence. They had 500,000 troops by 1968. Operation Rolling Thunder, which was all about dropping these millions of bombs. Why was that ineffective? In the second paragraph, what I would do is to talk about why the Viet Cong, or what the Viet Cong managed to do that made the US tactics ineffective. So you might have a look at source 3, for example, and maybe you'd look at something within source 1 or source 2 that you could talk about what it was that the Viet Cong did that made these US tactics so ineffective. And lastly, in the third paragraph, something that I really look for as a Year 12 history teacher is something known as a counter-argument. So you might agree with the statement, but it's really important that you consider the other side of the argument. And so what I would be looking for is for you to talk about what it was that the US did that actually was effective. Maybe there was something that you can see in these sources that was an effective strategy. Maybe it is the defoliation. Maybe it was firing this form of assault. You've got to have a look at these sources and work out what you think the US might have done well. And then lastly, I'm looking for a concluding statement. So if you are able to write an introductory and concluding statement, if you use evidence from all of the sources, if you have a counter-argument, so having this third paragraph here is really important. If you can do all of those things, then you're quite likely to receive the full marks for this question. Now, one last thing that I would like you to do in each paragraph is to use something known as the Teal Structure. You might be aware of this one through English or through essay writing and other subjects. But essentially, for every paragraph, what I'm wanting you to do is to write in a really structured manner. And so TEAL is an acronym. We'll just have a look. Here, the T stands for topic sentence. So you're going to introduce the paragraph. Now, I've already given you some ideas about what you might put in that paragraph. So you might use words from that question as part of your topic sentence. And in that sentence, you're going to state the main idea of the paragraph, and you're going to use keywords from the topic. And then the first E stands for explanation. So what do you mean by that? You need to give a little bit more idea or more detail about the idea. You need to flesh it out a bit. And once you've fleshed it out, then you're going to need to provide some examples or some evidence. So evidence from the text. I am looking for little bits of information, little phrases from each of the 6 sources. Throughout the paragraphs, I should be able to see evidence from all 6 sources. So if we go back here, you might find Now I'm probably going to do this wrong just because I'm not looking specifically at the sources, but you might think that there's evidence from source 1 and from source 5 and from source 6 that fits this first paragraph, and that's fine. So you might use some evidence from there. You might think that in the second one, source 2 and source 3 is really useful, and in this last paragraph, source 4 had some good information, source 1 and source 5, let's say. Now, that may not be completely accurate, so don't use that as a guide, but what you can see there is that all 6 sources have been accounted for. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I was marking a piece of work that had all of those 6 sources talked about through the 3 paragraphs, I would be pretty happy, and I would be more likely to give a decent mark for that question. But you want to make sure that the evidence supports the argument that you're making in that paragraph. Don't throw in evidence that makes absolutely no sense at all. And lastly, the L in Teal stands for link. So why is it all important? What you're wanting to do is to try and close off the argument. You might choose to link your last sentence into the next paragraph, but essentially I just want you to close off the argument and explain how the example links to the main idea. If you can do all of this, you will get 6 marks for this question. Don't forget, I am looking to see a draft for this task before the end of the week, so that I've got something fun to do over the weekend. All right. Hope that helps. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot them through on Sector.